Okay, so this week my plan is to play some fun and interactive Magic with modern Bogles, hexproof, whatever you want to call it. This list is a bit of an amalgam of what's basically the latest Moto list and the list that Harry Corvez and Mark Laliu played at Pro Tour Born of the Gods. So let's start here. Core Spirit Dancer in the deck. None of this no Core Spirit Dancer nonsense like Seamus had at Pro Tour Born of the Gods. It was a top 25 list, I believe. None of that nonsense. This is our best anti-combo card. It lets us turn for them basically every time. It's not getting cut. Three lifelink auras on top of the coronets. The split to the Spirit Link because one, it's cheaper, which is important in earlier games if you're trying to race with armor, and two, it actually allows you to double up because it doesn't actually give lifelink, it's trigger. You can also use Spirit Link targeting their guys to sort of shut them down if you're playing against something like Zoo. Kind of cute, probably doesn't come up much, but it's worth noting the card does that. Our standard 8 whammies are breakthrough enchantments. There's 3 Spirit Mantles because breaking through blockers was more of a concern. I think still is kind of a pretty big concern. This card can be trimmed a little further in metagames where people aren't actually blocking. Though to be fair, I don't know how good Bogles is in metagames where people aren't blocking, so worth bringing up. Also, a 2-drop is kind of important at times because if your opponents are playing Chalice of the Void, Chalice for 1 shuts down Armor, Umbra, Rancor, and Spirit Link, so getting a Coronet on a guy is kind of difficult, and this gives you another 3 ways to actually get an enchantment on a guy if you're on the draw. So I've opted for Suppression Field in the main deck hate card slot, or the main deck interactive card. Harry and Mark had Path to Exile instead. I think that was a lot to do with Zoo being part of the metagame instead of specifically Twin and Pod. I think Field's a little better against those 2 decks than Path is. It's worth noting that Path is better than Gelid Shackles because it is instant speed against Pod combos and Twin combos. Even though Gelid Shackles does do some cool stuff. It's also why I'm too lazy to find an actual snow-covered forest. So looking at the mana, Suppression Field definitely has an impact. We are cutting down to 4 fetch lands, which means you are technically cutting creatures because all the fetch lands used to be able to get a Dryad Arbor, which against a decent number of decks, if they don't have a way to kill your creature, guess what? Putting a bunch of auras on a Dryad Arbor is probably good enough. But in this deck, you do have to make a couple sacrifices to support Field. I do want to make note that Horizon Canopy is the absolute nuts, and being able to play a deck that utilizes this card is really good. Everyone knows how good the temples are in Standard, and this card is just like miles ahead of them, actually. Just the ability to straight up always make your mana on the time that you need it to be, making mana and draw a card is really huge. Moving to the sideboard, this is basically just Harry and Mark sideboard with the pass move there. There's more interaction. Teague is really good against Pod because it shuts down Cord and Pod. It's also good against Scape Shift. Acceptable, but not actually that good against Storm. And I'm trying to think what other combo we were boarding it in against. Good against Ad Nauseam, obviously, but in general, this guy's actually just fine. It's also worth noting that against Pod, you do need to board in more creatures. Because part of the plan is to board out these random dirtly non-interactive hexproof guys because you're boarding into a giant lock deck. The fact that Gahtering can wear a suit is pretty important. We've got our mix of generic Pod hate. We've got Matrix, Cage, just so we can't get got by their combo, which is actually, Pod's one of the worst matchups, but that involves your opponent playing it really well, which of course for the Pro Tour does matter. We've got our Storm hate, we've got our Rest in Pieces, our Graph Diggers cages. It's actually pretty difficult for them to natural us without the graveyard. Because of the lifelink making Grape Shot ranges very difficult to hit. Another Unflinching Courage as our 4th lifelink enchantment over another Spirit Link, just because having more effects that actually get our guys bigger is important. More Suppression Fields when this card is good, which is often. And another Ledgewalker. So one of the things game 1 is that scouting is really important with this deck, because knowing if you need a hexproof guy or not is pretty huge. And post-board, you definitely do want to have the ability to go up on hexproof guys so that you have more keepable openers against decks like Jund, where they could just lightning bolt your Arbor or your Spirit Dancer or whatever creature you put in the way. I'm pretty excited to not play a lot of fun Magic for my opponents tonight, and I hope we get to learn a lot of the interesting things of this deck. Like, for example, not extending into Abrupt Decay with single enchantment plus Daybreak Coronet, leaving up mana so you can fetch a Dryad Arbor with our, leaving up a Verdant Catacomb specifically so we can fetch a Dryad Arbor with it. There's actually a lot more play to this deck, and again, I'll cite the most ridiculous thing, which is Rest in Peace is not good against Living End, and the reason for that is you are actually trying to set up a situation where they have to constantly end back in a Spirit Dancer, and eventually they just lose to that. So I think it's worth noting there's a lot of very weird interactions because of the deck and the way it works. And it's not just the kind of thing you straight up pick up out of nowhere. So that's why I'm playing it today.